panelists.
Right now?
Yeah, you want them sat in, panelists?
Let's start with Susan and we'll come up. You'll invite us up.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you today?
Good, thank you.
Good.
Yeah.
So there will be panelists with you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, and you've been told about the mics and everything.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. All right, shall we get started? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. This is an unusual hour for the Ocean Pavilion to have a session, but when the opportunity came, it came in a little bit late, so the best time we could find is now. But I'm very impressed that on the sixth day, after 6 o'clock in the afternoon, you still have the energy to be here, and that goes to show you the importance of the topic. When we and the Water Pavilion, Water for Climate Pavilion, joined hands to have a cross-pavilion session where the ocean and freshwater communities can come together to discuss and identify opportunities to collaborate across science, policy, and practice for healthy ecosystems and decisive climate action. And so this is the first, but it is by no means going to be the last, and we look forward to continuing to collaborate with Water and Climate Pavilion, Water for Climate Pavilion in the future activities. We have... Yes, let's clap, yay. I should first introduce myself. My name is Kilaparti Ramakrishna. I'm the director of the Marine Policy Center at the Hole Oceanographic Institution in Massachusetts. We have a terrific panel, and we have a special guest, a dear friend and a senior official from the United Nations Environment Program, Susan Gardner. She is director of the Ecosystem Services in UNEP. She graciously agreed at the last minute to come and offer her remarks, but she has other commitments, so she will be leaving after her remarks. So if you have any quick questions for her, so immediately after she finishes talking, please raise those questions, and then we will get on with the rest of the panel. Susan, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Rama, and I do appreciate the opportunity to share some remarks and reflections at the beginning of this important conversation, and it's such a great idea to combine the Ocean Pavilion together with the Water for Climate Pavilion, because this topic really is so critical. It feels sort of like the rest of the world has finally caught up with what scientists have known for a long time, which is that siloed thinking just doesn't work. And that's really what we're here today to discuss. Tracking climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution requires a completely different type and deeper collaboration than we've probably ever seen before. And earlier this year, at the UN Water Conference, the first time in 50 years that it was held, we heard that there was essentially a universal call to reduce the fragmentation. Reducing fragmentation across all different sectors, whether that's drinking water, sanitation, freshwater, marine, and coastal. But these are literally life and death issues. Just recently, a few weeks ago, I attended a meeting in Brussels of the EU-UN annual consultation on prevention, stabilization, and peace building. And all of the agencies that were around the table essentially recognized the importance of climate, understood that water, whether that was scarcity or flooding, was central to their work. So we recognize that we have to work together. This is part of all of our mandates in the UN system. If we work together, we can be effective. And the Secretary General has called for this specifically when he said we need more networked and inclusive multilateralism. I don't know how many people know what that even means. It's kind of UN speak for saying, UN agencies, could you just stop bickering and start working together? And that's essentially what we know is our call at this point. We have a UN environmental management group that essentially pools together all the different UN agencies to support in one UN effort the commitments of member states under the various multilateral environmental agreements. And we had a meeting just over the weekend of this environmental management group. And Valerie Hickey from the World Bank, I think, put it best when she said, When we compete rather than collaborate, the results of our effort are less than the sum of our parts. And I thought, okay, that sort of sums it up. Yep. And I think that message has really landed. It's not just, of course, about UN agencies working together. The Secretary General has also called for closer and more meaningful contacts with business, with civil society, with indigenous people, with all the other stakeholders. So this means we have a responsibility from UN agencies, but from all of us, to actually bring together more different perspectives across the freshwater sector and across the ocean's agenda. And doing this correctly means working together, and that's why we're here now. And I'd just like to give a few examples of where UNEP is trying to actually walk the talk. We have been a proud partner of the Action Platform for Source-to-Sea Management from its very inception in 2014. And this platform brings together a wide range of actors committed to holistic management of land, fresh water, and the ocean. And it's played a really important role in bringing together these different communities and building these bridges between SDG 6 and SDG 14. What we heard in the UN Water Conference is so important. We have some examples of work in UNEP, like the EU-funded Go Blue project that's in Kenya. When you come to Kenya for the UN Environment Assembly, if you have time to go to the coast, visit this amazing program. UNEP and partners are working together with our county physical planners and marine biologists, as well as national agencies, to help directly connect marine spatial planning together with county land use planning and integrate into that the scientific information as well as local and indigenous knowledge, and bring this together across the entire water continuum. We've had an event earlier today on the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, and some of the UN flagships are examples of this is how you do restoration correctly. The Decade is jointly led between UNEP and FAO, and we have examples like the new SIDS restoration flagship. Vanuatu is one of those who will actually correctly integrate water resource management on the freshwater side with integrated coastal management to join up the work that they're doing to preserve their freshwater drinking water aquifers, as well as restoring mangroves at the same time. And I encourage you all to get to know as well some of our UNEP-administered regional seas programs, because there's a lot of great examples, whether it's in San Lucia, where they're looking at working in protected parks on the land to reduce sediment runoff that goes into the estuaries and into places that are very popular scuba diving sites for tourists in order to ensure that they've got some control over water clarity. Those kinds of projects. The Seychelles is working on upstream control using nature-based solutions to reduce the nutrient runoff from pig farms 500 meters up into the mountains. That is actually coming down into the estuaries and causing eutrophication. So there's a lot of great examples of projects like that where, together with the regional seas, parties are looking across how you do this right. I mean, we know that on Earth, water is essentially life. Everywhere that there's water, you're going to find biological diversity, and you're going to find human activity and prosperity. But water that supports life and our human livelihoods continues to be under threat if we don't manage it correctly. We see patterns of drought and flood now, and intensity of storms. The ability of marine and aquatic ecosystems to sustain change and to continue to host and sustain life is at risk. But wherever there's risk, we know there's opportunity. And just like water gives life to this planet, we can also look to water as the hope to change the course of our action, and that starts with all of us and how we're working together. We can create new ways of equitably and efficiently and effectively supplying water to people, to crops, to industry, to all of us that need it. And partnerships like this Ocean's Water Pavilion, they show that we are looking for new ways to find meaningful collaboration across all of the different boundaries. So as my final message to all of you, I just say, please don't be shy in these conversations that you're having today. I encourage you, break down the barriers, take full advantage of this opportunity of this safe space for truly, truly blue thinking. Thank you, Rama.
Thank you. Susan, before you disappear, I just want to, something that is not in the script, but I want to say this. If we could have a group picture of the panelists, and particularly my good friend Franz Stattenbach, who's minister from Costa Rica and is responsible for the UN Ocean Conference 3 in Nice. And this is very apropos because he takes this message away. Could you also come and join us, Susan, please? One of the key messages from Susan's talk is breaking down the silos. Now, you might think it makes perfect sense. We can make a lot more progress if we were to work together. And sometimes we blame the UN and intergovernmental organizations for continuing to persist on it. But one of the key problems there is not the UN and the intergovernmental organizations, but the way we structure our governments, and they in turn structure the intergovernmental organizations. But again, as we said, this is a very good start, and we're doing that. And I'm particularly delighted to invite a very remarkable number of panelists that we have here to come and take their seats on the podium. Let's start with the very first panelist, Basil von Havre, Director General of Biodiversity Policy and Partnership, Canadian Wildlife Service. If you might leave that for me, I will sit there, but the next one onwards is good. Vivian Franco, Sustainability Project Manager of Oord, and Steve Widdicombe, a colleague, compatriot, and a guru from Plymouth Marine Laboratories, and also his Deputy Chief Executive of the Plymouth Marine Laboratories. And finally, Ruth Mathews, Coordinator for S25 Platform and Senior Manager from Stockholm International Water Institute. Let's start the inquiry, the conversation here. What do you think are the main issues faced by the public sector? You come from the government and when working on issues that cross the freshwater and marine divide.
Probably, I would say the main issue is a very simple one, and one that should not be there. It's about talking to each other. We talked about silos. The administration usually are separated. We have colleagues in fisheries and ocean ministries, and making sure that we have proper way of communication and structuring programs across those organizations in a way that is transparent to the public and to people that needs them is the #1 challenge we have. Over time, we develop good communication with colleagues. We get to know each other, but things change, etc. It's always a ship to be rebuilt as we go forward. So I would say that's one of the main one.
But thank you for that. But we know, looking at governments, they always structure these in different ministries. Water belongs to one, and marine issues belong to the other. How do we, what is the message in terms of fostering collaboration between them that we can give to the member countries? Because what they do is going to reflect on what the international organizations do.
So some of you may know that I've been coordinating the negotiation of the Global Biodiversity Framework over the last few years. So it would come as no surprise that I think having clear performance targets and commitment for action at the government level is a very useful tool to make people work together. The second point is to create internally to the country structure where the various administration are forced to talk together and integrate through reports to parliaments, through public reporting, and through reporting to the UN system in an integrated fashion. And that's why when we negotiated the GBF, you will notice that there is no mention of this is for ocean and this is for terrestrial, this is for freshwater and this is not. We have tried to leave that integrated and leave the distinction at the level of the indicators.
That's excellent. I mean, you mentioned the Kunming framework and the reporting that goes on there. In addition to, we are now two different communities, but coming together to talk about this, how do we make this more of a thing, not just, a one-off event at places like this? Do we need anything in place, or do we just need good thinking people coming together and then saying that this is the way to do business?
I think we need to continue the work of integration that we started a few years ago with the negotiation of the Kunming-Montreal framework, where there was an acceptance of that notion that we should not making any distinction between the two, and we should allow for the integration. And then, in fact, what the person we need here is my co-chair, Francis Ogwal from Uganda, because he is coming from a part of the world where there is very large body of fresh water, and he has made us, all of us, realize the importance of having the integration all the way from freshwater all to the saltwater.
Great. One last question before I go to the other panelists, and then I'll come back to you towards the end, time permitting. We are here at a climate COP. Can you give any concrete examples of what working together for the freshwater and the marine community is going to do in helping stabilize the global climate system?
You're taking me back at a time where I was a commissioner on a commission that managed the air quality and water quality in the St. Lawrence estuaries and the Great Lakes with the US, and very practical things about the regime for making decision on water level are deeply impacted by climate change. And what was possible 50 years ago with relatively straightforward management regime is not possible anymore. And you have to find ways to bring together the various communities in a system that takes into consideration the vast variation in meteorological condition and hydrological condition on those body of water. So it was a great experience. I've probably lost a few here in the process, but that's okay. I got some left.
Thank you. Vivian, you have heard Basil talk about the benefits of working together. Clearly, the fact that we are here and that it is the first time that we're doing it together means that we need to do something more. What, in your opinion, would help accelerate this process?
Well, I'm here also representing the private sector, and more specifically the Dutch marine contractor, Van Oord. So I really think that breaking these silos, we really will understand where are we overlapping, but also where are the blind spots. Actually, we were talking about that this morning. We can really understand, we can really improve the understanding that we have of the systems on the hydrological cycle as well. And well, as a private sector, we are looking into how we can provide those solutions and really sharing those knowledge, really sharing that knowledge, but also learning from others. So I think I cannot speak, of course, from a whole private sector, but from my company, we already are conscious about the importance of being also involved in the water sector, although we are a Dutch marine contractor. So I think that's having that role already brings us to really realize all the benefits that we can have to create a better world for future generations.
Right. I mean, I'm glad you brought in the fact that you represent, you're from a private sector company, but the challenges are so formidable that we need more of you thinking about these issues. Are you doing anything in terms of joining hands with like companies, whether it is Business Council for Sustainable Development or entities like that? What do you think companies should be doing to accelerate progress?
Well, I think it's all about collaboration. So we were in March in the UN Water Conference, and with Ruth here, we started the Blue Coalition, and this has been really from a landscape approach. So we came all together, 6 organizations, NGOs, private sector, consultancy, and contractors, and trying to find, okay, where we can create impact, being very practical. And we have selected Bonaire as a pilot, and having this landscape approach, we really look at the island as a whole, where we can have also coastal resilience, but also inland systems as well that can be also benefit from what is facing. So I think it's a clear example how we can be very practical and how we can really implement already by collaborating.
Right. No, again, the point that we would hear in conferences like this is how the challenges are so big that no individual country, company, however big, is going to be able to go it alone. We need partnerships. That's all well taken. But those of us in the audience that don't know how private sector operates in terms of improving either biodiversity or climate change, can you give us any specific examples from your company on how this is being done?
Yeah, definitely. I think the private sector has, of course, a role. We also need a seat in the table to create an impact on to address the challenge on biodiversity loss and climate change. From Van Oord, we have the initiative called Ocean Health, and we are focusing on corals, mangroves, seagrass, and seaweed. And by looking to this ecosystem restoration, we are actually looking into ways to address those challenges. And of course, we are also having the nature-based solutions as part of our portfolio of services. So there is a lot that we can offer, and I think having the opportunity to really show what we can do, and also being able to talk with scientists. Yesterday we were talking, for example, about the ocean decade and how we are actually sharing the data. So that's all. There are so many ways that we can really collaborate and really make some progress. That those are just a few examples.
Very good. I mean, for those of you that do not know, the UN Ocean Decade, through the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, has a panel that includes private sector representative as the co-chair, and then there is a membership that works there, and I don't know if you are involved with that or not, but thank you very much for that. Now let me move on to Steve Widdicombe. Steve, you are from one of the preeminent marine research institutions in the world, and we from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution collaborate with you very closely. And I sort of know the answer, but the script says I should ask you this question, so I'm going to ask the question anyways. Have you conducted joint research efforts with freshwater researchers? And if not, why not?
Well, the answer is yes, but not as much as we should have. I think I'll answer the why we haven't done as much before I go on to examples of where we have and where it's been really successful. I think ultimately, as creatures of habit, we often stick to what we know. And we also stick to what is essentially relatively easy in terms of the sources of funding. It's often people go, "Oh, you're talking about funding again." But actually, we get stuck in our silos because that's where the funding sources seem to be. There are pots of ocean money, pots of water money, pots of terrestrial money. And until there's a disruptor in the system where people go, actually, no, we're going to shake it up and we're going to do something a bit differently, it becomes very difficult to jump out of that mindset. And in the UK, the Natural Environment Research Council decided it was going to take some of its what it calls national capability money, which comes to organisations like my own, also the National Oceanographic Centre, but also the other centres, Centre for Ecology Hydrography, British Antarctic Survey, atmospheric associations, and it said, okay, I want you to use a bit of that money to come up with cross-centre projects. Mm-hmm. Because we don't want these silos anymore. And one of the projects we came up with, a project called Ag Zero, where we started working through the terrestrial, freshwater, marine systems to understand how agricultural practices, land management practices, were going to have an effect on the function, the biodiversity, the function, the health, and the well-being of the coastal system, because it's intrinsic for us to understand how the changes we see in the coastal system, primarily they're being driven by things out with the area in which we're working, you know. And it's not just about, it's not just a supply chain in what I put in at the top of the river comes out at the end. The way in which it flows down has a huge effect. So the choices we take as in the way we manage our rivers, you know, traditionally where we think it's, oh, we need to get this water as quickly as we possibly can from the top of the river out into the ocean, has huge effects on how the chemistry works. In my particular area of interest in ocean acidification, you know, huge amounts of the alkalinity that you find in coastal zones is affected by processes that go on in the river. So to think that, you know, you can think about a global process like ocean acidification, but at a coastal level, a huge amount of that is controlled and can be manipulated by changing the way we manage the transition of water from the upper sources down to the coast itself. So, oh, excuse me. So I would say we need to do a lot more, but in order to create the opportunities, it's really great to have a disruptive influence. And often funders can provide that disruption if we are being a little bit reluctant to do so.
Thank you. I mean, you really addressed the acidification issue quite nicely. And I want to ask you a question that we are trying to deal with in this Ocean Pavilion. And one of the reasons why we started this in the Blue Zone last year is how little attention is paid to marine issues and the potential that they have in addressing climate. Mm-hmm. And we are now in the second iteration, and yep. You know, we're seeing a lot of progress. We see a lot of mention of it in the documents that are coming up. But it has been a challenge. How do you think working with Freshwater, I mean, you know, Freshwater and Climate Pavilion that they are trying to address the question of including that in the climate solutions as well. So how does working together with Freshwater help marine institutions like ours that believe that we have solutions to contribute? How does this joint effort work to meet climate stabilization goals?
Well, fragmentation never really helps when it comes to clarity of message. And it's an easy distraction technique to be able to split people up. But I think, in essence, as a community, we should be, you know, we should be confident in being able to share our messaging. Because inevitably, we're talking about natural resources that are shared amongst us. You know, hydrogen and oxygen molecules don't really care whether they're in the atmosphere or the river or the ocean. I mean, it's called a cycle for a reason. So we need to stop chunking it up into these pieces. Because, and I go back, the solutions that we implement in terms of the coastal zone, they only really work if we can properly constrain some of the major inputs as well. And actually, there are some fantastic there are fantastic experiences and lived experiences of how you do that in other places. We talk about the decade of ecosystem restoration. I would say largely the ocean community has ignored it pretty much. We have been so focused on our own ocean decade, a decade of ocean science, that this other decade has largely gone by unnoticed, yet we constantly hear people talking about the importance of restoring and regenerating blue carbon habitats as sources of nature-based solutions. But the skills in how you approach habitat restoration, how you engage with the public to get public buy-in and support on projects that restore nature and use that as an effective way to mitigate and adapt to climate are being played out in other places, and we're essentially reinventing the wheel. Right. So I would argue that there is a huge amount of shared experiences to ensure that we meet a shared goal.
Right. I totally agree with you. But you are a senior scientist, at the top of the food chain, as they say. But if you're a junior scientist, an assistant scientist, coming to establish yourself, are you seen as straying from the field if you were to talk about collaborating and working with freshwater resources? I mean, the main question is, how do we motivate the younger people that are coming into this field that they should work across these fields? I mean, is it funding? Is it institutional policies? And what do we need to do?
We'll put funding to one side because, yes, there's an element. There's elements of funding. But there's also opportunity of meeting each other as well. And familiarity means that you'll get to start to work with. You know what it was like as an early career scientist when you went to meetings. You meet people, right, and you create those relationships which effectively underpin your future career. You work with the people you know, you trust, you build up personal relationships, and you continue to work with them. Right. We look at the way in which conferences are set up. We've got an ocean conference, we've got a water conference, we've got the aquatic sciences conference. However, when you go to an aquatic science conference, all the freshwater sessions are in one place, all the marine sessions are in the other place. You said this is the first time we've reached out to try and get these two communities together here. We don't make it easy for people to create those personal relationships and to build those collaborations. And maybe we need to think a little bit more about having places where we can meet, where the ocean section in a water conference isn't a minority sport being played out over on one side, and equally in the same with the marine-themed conferences as well.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. One of the reasons I've asked Franz Tettenbach to come here is that Costa Rica, France, and United Nations, as you know, are the hosts. And I wanted him to see that we're trying to connect these things. And then so I think he will take that message back. But in any case, I'm meeting with him tomorrow, and I'll try to reinforce that again. Ruth, you are the reason why we're all here together. I mean, it's in fact her idea, not ours, to come together and then do that. But when I heard it, I said immediately, great, we should definitely do that. And you come from Stockholm International Water Institute, and it's a leading freshwater organization. I want to know what your colleagues think of what you're doing.
Yeah, that's a great question. Because, maybe I'll give a little bit of a history of how we got into this. So it was around 2010, 2011, so it's been quite some years, that we realized that a lot of the impact to coastal and marine ecosystems is coming from the upstream, from land-based activities and the way that we manage water resources. And we thought that we were in an ideal situation to be able to motivate those upstream actors to understand their impact on the downstream ecosystems, because those are the people that we know. And so we started the development of the Source to Sea concept, and in 2014 launched the Source to Sea platform. And I started with this adventure, let's say, as the coordinator of the Source to Sea platform in 2018. And I would say that initially, most of my colleagues didn't really know what Ruth was doing, didn't really think that they had any reason to get to know what Ruth was doing. And it was kind of a side affair, kind of a niche thing that was going on. But over time, as we started engaging in the global conversations, and there was the response of, yes, we need more of this holistic approach. We need to have a more integrated way of approaching these problems. That then I think it started making sense to my colleagues why I was doing this. So I kind of had to prove to them that it was worth the while, and I guess I'm quite pleased in seeing the progression that has happened. I think Susan mentioned it at the UN Water Conference. Many more people were saying we really need to have a more holistic approach. We need to break down the silos. You mentioned the UN Ocean Conference. We were part of the group of people that really advocated for there to be a high-level water symposium as part of the UN Water Conference. We also made sure that we brought Source to Sea and the ocean into the UN Water Conference. We want to continue building this bridge between the two so we don't have the problem of not having friends on the other side. This is really what we're trying to do.
That's great. I mean, but having friends is a question of also how you bring these issues to their attention and how you connect with them. And you have done the hard work of reaching that, and that's quite commendable. But I still have to ask you this question. What are, if any, significant disconnections, difficulty that you had in reaching them, and what opportunities do you advocate moving forward to really build these bring these two communities together?
Yes, so like I said, we know the freshwater community because we're an International Water Institute. We hold the World Water Week every year. So we bring together the water community on an annual basis, and we're very familiar with who those actors are. Where we really struggled was to make any connections with the ocean community. And I was saying earlier today that I sort of felt like there's a bit of a blind spot in the ocean community, not in you. Obviously, you get it. But often I experience people in the ocean community, looking at the ocean, and it's about the ocean. One place where I think things started to click is with the marine litter issue and plastic pollution.
Right.
In the early years of that issue, what the ocean people talked about was ghost fishing gear and water bottles coming off of ships and things like that. There wasn't the connection immediately to this is coming down from the land and through the rivers to the ocean. And so I think that issue has helped open up the dialogue and the understanding that the impacts to the ocean aren't just ocean originated. They originate elsewhere. So it's been a real challenge for us to get ocean organizations to join the Source to Sea platform and to really build this partnership conversation going. And PML actually was one of the first to kind of break that that barrier and join us. I think because you obviously have the history of some research and experience to recognize that, wait a minute, we are impacted by this, and so we do need to be in community and engage with this.
I'm glad you acknowledged PML. Nothing against that, but we at WHOI also do that. You know, and
so I would love for you to join the Source to See platform.
It's largely credit to National Science Foundation. They do encourage, you know, these kinds of projects, and then we have some of them. So now I want to turn to the audience. Generally, you get to ask the questions of the panelists, but we thought, given the lateness of the hour, I ask you the questions. So the question is, I mean, you are clearly interested in this topic. You wouldn't be here, as I said, after 6 p.m. on the 6th day of a very intense conference. What opportunities do you see in your work for collective engagement? I'd like to ask the panelists to respond to you, but then any of you can raise, you know, your hand and then speak to this. What opportunities do you see in your work for collective engagement between freshwater and ocean community? I can't see you very well because there is this huge light on my face, but who would like to speak to it? I can see all of you, so you can raise your hand anytime. Okay, way at the back. Yes. And if you could kindly say your name and institution.
Sorry, you're going to hate this. Matt Frost, PML. I'm sorry. I work mainly in policy, and I think one of the opportunities is this is all about, it's got to happen right from the top. And one of the big exciting things is there's a lot more of a movement now to bring a lot of the big legislation together. So whether it's CBD, UNFCCC, but also things like Ramsar and a lot of these, there's a lot more movement now right at the very top to say we can't operate in these silos from a policy point of view. And I also see that nationally as well, trying to bring policy together. So for me, that brings a lot of opportunity because Steve talked about funding and the way of that. Once at the top, we start to say we need to work holistically. To me, that will trickle down through funding, through research councils, hopefully then to the science. And yeah, it's an opportunity, I believe. But we've got a long way to go, sorry, though. We're not there yet.
Right. I mean, that's a very good point. And we have 2 more hands. And, you know, yeah, please.
Hi, my name is Ruth Gutierrez. I'm from Belize, and I am from the Islands and Small State Institute of the University of Malta. Oh. My background, of course, is NGO, MPA management, marine protected areas. So it's quite strong in the marine. But now that I've been embarked, well, I'm in my last year of my PhD looking at seaweed farming in Caribbean SIDS. Freshwater came up a lot because of drought issues, and now the marine sector is trying to adapt, you know, techniques to make freshwater on the islands, whether it's desalination or rainwater catchment. So my question is, my observation is, I see the interest of interdisciplinary studies. Just a lot in academia now, using different frameworks. And I think it's a movement towards that. And like I am one of those. I was brought up in interdisciplinary story. But sometimes I feel out of place. I'm not from there, I'm not from here. So how is that really integrated into these, you know, private, public companies and into policy, interdisciplinary backgrounds? I hope I was clear. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll take the next intervention from here, and then no, is it Tekla? No, Tekla. No. Okay. You're raising hand for somebody else. Wonderful.
Okay, good evening. My name is Julie Mulonga. I work for Wetlands International. So really, we've been working downstream in the mangroves. But of course, one realization is the mangroves are being affected by what's happening upstream. So when we come to the table, we bring in approaches such as integrated water resource management. That sometimes is our starting point, because we are finding that more and more that downstream the mangroves are being affected by what's happening downstream. Upstream. A lot of the times it's development, a lot of the times it's agriculture, whatever it may be. So in those instances, then you're able to bring different people within a catchment together to begin the conversation. So not only talking to the people that are at the coast, but really taking all those people within the catchment. So I'd say the catchment-based approach, or IWRM, has helped us a lot in this. Thank you.
Terrific. We clearly have a very well-informed audience, and you know they are basically echoing many of the things that you said. But going back to the very first response, you know, it's not uncommon that we hear these things, not just between these two communities, but across a range of things where cooperation, collaboration, partnership matters, etc. But why is it we are still far from getting there? Steve.
Thank you very much. This one on? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I sometimes think the language doesn't help as well, in that, you know, the source to sea, I think it reflects kind of a passage of materials from one place to another. And in essence, you know, I've reached out to some freshwater people, and sometimes there's been a bit of reluctance that the salty side of it almost seems to be, well, it's your problem now. We push it out. It's out of our realm now. You now deal with things. And I wonder whether, rather than source to sea, it should be source to me, because the plastics that we put into the rivers flow down and they end up in the shellfish, in the fish, and they end up on our plates. The nutrients we put into the rivers end up growing sargassum, and it ends up back on our tourist beaches and disrupting our tourist industries. The nutrients also cause harmful algal blooms, which create toxins that end up back affecting our human health. So rather than it being source to sea over there somewhere, ultimately, it's source all the way back to me.
Right. I mean, that's a very good point. I mean, you know, how you try to get this message across makes a huge difference, you know. But still, you know, Susan talked about how the Secretary General urges his colleagues to work together. In fact, I was in UNEP before Susan came on board, before I moved on to other places in Northeast Asia. And when I worked on the first Global Climate Summit, the United Nations Secretary General at the time said flat out that I do not want all the 64 agencies going out and promoting 64 different messages. I want you to come together, and then on each issue, only one person, one entity will speak, and you know, the rest would follow. So, I mean, this is not new. That's what I'm trying to get at, you know, and yet so much doesn't get done. Ruth, what do you think we should do? And I want to come to Basil and then finally end with private sector. Yes.
Yeah, what should we do? I'll join the Source to Sea platform and create a bigger community that is working together to, you know, to really drive this agenda. I think, so that's one thing, but that's, you know, right. I have to say that, right? I guess I want to speak a little bit to what you said back there about being interdisciplinary, and so you're kind of everything but nothing. I've been interdisciplinary my entire life, and I really relate to that. And I think that's part of the problem, is that the way that we have been trained to think a lot through, you know, through school, through research, you know, all of these processes, and it comes into the public sector area is in bits and pieces. You know, you narrow in on a specific topic, and you get smarter and smarter and smarter by getting narrower and narrower and narrower. and this is something that I just, at a personality level, learned quite young that I could not do because I like to think broadly. And so I think, so what do we need to do? We need to change education as a starting point so that we encourage that kind of connective thinking more, that we encourage lack of specialties, that we encourage a broader, a broader perspective, that's what gets rewarded, is when you can see the connections as opposed to that you get smarter and smarter about one individual thing. So I think that's one thing that we can do. I think there's also an aspect you were saying, Matt, about the public policy level. Similarly, can we reward coordination as opposed to reward, I've got the money and my department or my ministry or whatever is stronger than yours because I got the money. I had a conversation with GCF recently and said, is there a way that through their funding mechanism, so it could be GCF or JEF or other types of funding mechanisms, that what gets rewarded is coordination, is integration, is finding synergies, is thinking systemically. So we need to flip what we think is of value and help develop those skill sets that allow us to be able to make those connections and see them. So I think that's really critical of, from the bottom up and the top down.
Right. Again, I can't find anything the matter with it. It's entirely constructive way of looking at it. But I want to ask Basil, you are in a government office, you're the Director General, you have the power to make things happen, and you not only have control of the department that you run, but also how you represent the country in the international negotiations. Do you think of this? I mean, are you constrained by what Ruth said, that the more power for me to do my thing is more important than sharing power, responsibility with others, so that we can do together bigger things?
First, it's useful to look at what is missing and what we could do, but it's also useful to look at the progress made. I'm amazed at the amount of collaboration we've developed over the last few years. Like I would say over the last 5 years. So let's learn from what has worked and let's do more of that in a way to get to the result we want, which is more integration. My sense is that the smart senior executive in the public sector is the one that reached to colleagues and seek to accomplish more through bringing in others. And you can see that in the younger generation very much. And I'm encouraged to see how things are evolving, and I'm quite confident that the older way of trying to amass bigger budgets for oneself are not going to be the one that's going to be favored by the younger generation. So I have full confidence in the future, in a future where we're going to see much more collaboration and integration.
Well, it's great. I mean, you brought in an element that is really quite central to what the United Nations is trying to do, including at the climate conference and what the Secretary General says, which is engagement by youth on these matters. And Vivian, you are the youngest member of the panel. Though you are representing here your company, speak for a moment about what Basil had just said. What role do you see the younger generation playing in this matter? And what can countries, companies, whether in the name of corporate social responsibility or anything, ESG, what have you, can do to bring more young people into thinking about the kind of thinking holistically and then working towards the broader good?
Yeah, I really think it's about getting out of the comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
So we are also really pushing inside our companies and myself as well to take those risks, to be in that area that is still unknown, and sometimes we just need to move forward and learning by doing. Really, there is still to do. There is still a lot to do. And I think, it feels sometimes that we have a lot of weight on our shoulders, like as younger generations. Mm-hmm. A lot of things to fix. It feels like that. I think because I have been also a youth representative, we are also really being open-minded about bringing ideas and as you mentioned, Steve, like to make some friends. And making those scenarios more comfortable to really work. So for the ones that maybe know me, I'm very pushy on making things happen. And really, sometimes it's really tiring, but we have a lot of energy. I have a lot of energy for that. So really getting out of that comfort zone, taking the risk, have a vision. and as you mentioned, Basil, about this collaboration. I also mentioned collaboration, but I think this is something that we need to keep delivering that message all the time. Collaboration, but real collaboration, not only something that it's staying, for example, here today, but then we maybe meet after the COP and think, okay, now what are we going to do for real? So that's will be the message.
We have a couple of minutes. If there is any question to any particular panelist, now is the time. Yes.
Maybe a little bit more generic. What's coming up in my mind was, let's say,
the microphone.
Sorry. Yeah. What's coming up, let's say, based on the discussion, what's popping up in my mind was the buzzword, we need more holistic engineering. And I think in the end, holistic engineering is not a buzzword. So maybe the panel can, let's say, reflect a little bit on the element. We need more system engineering. So, well, I'm working in the same company as Viv. So we work, let's say, on inland project, dikes, freshwater, but also, let's say, on the edge, on the tidal areas offshore. And even internally, we make really a distinction in engineers who are working, let's say, onshore and offshore. So I think for us, it's also a pledge maybe to combine more, but it's not that easy. Also based on, let's say, the education element and the people we are hiring. Until now, we are hiring a coastal engineering. For inland projects, we are hiring a water management specialist. So maybe you can reflect a little bit, how can we, let's say, endorse a little bit more the holistic engineering and also in respect to the system engineering side.
Thank you. So we are almost at the end of the hour. So why not I ask panelists, starting with Ruth this time, I'll go the other way. 30 seconds. We've all heard the issues. We've talked about what is important, what needs to be done. We talked about the difficulties, but also opportunities. 30 seconds, what are one or two things that you would recommend that would make a difference moving forward? Ruth.
Yeah, so one thing is that we don't stop here, that this is the beginning of a conversation, that we follow up with more conversations, thinking together, how can we create a stronger community and a stronger impact on the direction that we're going by joining forces. Then maybe the other thing is that we really take this to heart and see how in our daily work we can reach across to other disciplines, other viewpoints, and start listening start with listening and discussion, so that we can really learn from each other and find a path to a different way of approaching things.
Thank you. Steve, same question.
a couple of things come to mind. I was really struck by what you said around the focus in on being an alpha academic. You know, we see the way in which some organisations structure themselves, that you have somebody's lab, and there's an alpha academic, and they control everything around them, and they're in competition with everyone else's alpha labs, and that really doesn't reward. How do we actually award those people who are prepared to put aside their own egos and be part of bigger teams? You know, you don't always have to be the principal scientist. You can bring your expertise, and you can work as sort of a matrix-style approach to these complex problems. I think we currently reward people for getting their elbows out and becoming the tallest tree in the forest, and I think we need to stop that. We also need to give more opportunities, particularly in terms of early career researchers, to have events like these and create those relationships and sort of connections that will allow them to have challenging conversations and realize actually there are great ways in which they can bring their own skills and expertise together. You know, this should not be an unusual event in the future. Exactly. This should be something that we strive to do more and more and more.
Terrific. Thank you. Viviana.
I will try the shorter. So I think really get out of the comfort zone, keep communicating, and keep collaborating. I will say those are my 3 points to really move forward into action. Yeah.
Terrific. Thank you. Basil.
The academic world is very different from government. And actually, government doesn't care whether scientist A is in that field, scientist B. They want an answer to a policy question, and they want help to resolve it. We recognize that people need to be trained in certain field, and they need to a certain level of expertise, and that may create career paths, and that's fine. But at the end of the day, the science world will organize the way they want, and they will provide, and then the challenge is for that science world to provide advice that is useful for policy making. And in the absence of advice, government officials will make decisions. So it's up, and I'm throwing the ball a little bit to the science world to say, do it the way you want, but get us the integrated answer.
Right, fantastic. Well, we have a great panel and a terrific message, but I want to take just 10 seconds to say re-emphasize what Vivian and Ruth have said, which is, if you believe in doing a thing, don't be afraid to be pushy. Work hard. If that means making friends to get the job done, great. If it is something else, that is fine too, as long as you believe that the end results are going to work to what you're trying to accomplish. It is my great honor to be given this role, and I want to thank the organizers of both the Water for Climate Pavilion and the Ocean Pavilion for this opportunity to me. And then I ask all of you to join me in a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you very much. I think we are done for the day. Food and drinks. Food and drinks. Yeah.